Thunder Grunt.
Hey guys,
Bob.
Hello.
how you guys doing?
Doing awesome.
Well, welcome to Writers Blockbusters,
Yes.
a podcast where we treat the final edit of a movie like the script.
Why?
Well, Jamie, the reason is there's several reasons which we're not going to cover right now. Anyway, so today, before we talk about a movie, we're going to introduce ourselves.
Yes.
So let's start with you.
I am Jimmy George. I am a screenwriter and full-time script consultant, and my Twitter handle is @JimmyRGeorge.
I am Jamie Nash. I am a screenwriter.
And your Twitter handle is?
My Twitter handle is @Jamie_Nash.
He couldn't remember.
That's slight pause. And I'm Bob Rose. My Twitter handle is @ThunderGruntBob. And then, I'm a person that does stuff. Anyway, we're going to talk about Shining, Dr. Sleep.
Yes.
What it should have been called. Jamie, how much did it make?
How much
So
did
far.
it make?
How much
It
did it
made a whopping...
So far as of this recording.
$18 million.
Ooh.
It's not. This is the second. This is the first.
This is the
weekend?
second week.
Second week.
Second week. We're into week. Are we into week 2?
Yeah.
We're into week 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
So well, it's already underperformed as
Wow.
as we're talking about it.
18 million.
It is
Yeah.
not a blockbuster.
No.
No, it is not. Yeah. Jamie, do you know how good the original did?
The Shining made $44 million in its opening week, so it's kind of on par with The Shining.
I guess with inflation, though.
With inflation, it made $44 million in its opening release. I mean,
So
not
it wasn't a hit when it came out?
No.
though, it wasn't as bad as I thought.
Yeah, that's way higher than I thought. It was gonna
44
be.
million is not bad
In the
for that-
70s.
in the
I
70s
mean,
in
yeah.
that day and age, because there were probably blockbusters that made 60.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it did cost 19 million, which is a lot of money for a horror flick.
Yeah,
back
wow.
in those days.
And I said
1980, by the way.
I was reading last
Okay.
night about
1980. I said 70s.
May 1980. You were
okay.
close.
Okay.
how the original got voted for the Razzies, and Stanley Kubrick got a worst director
That is just
Wow.
crazy.
nomination.
Wow.
Stuff changes over
Wow.
time, man.
Also,
Wow.
horror movies definitely kind of in a slum back then, even despite The Exorcist and some things. But, it was slumming a little bit for
Right.
him to do a Stephen King adaptation.
This is like our fourth or fifth Stephen
It's our
King,
fourth this
right?
year.
This year.
It just shows you.
It's the
And
time.
that's what I wanted to bring up.
That's
like,
the times.
do you
right.
think, I feel like we might have finally hit this oversaturation.
I think so.
I disagree that that's the reason this failed.
No,
you know that.
yeah,
you know I disagree.
Here's my thing. I don't think the Stephen King aspect alone gets me to the movie at all.
No.
Or it's even that special anymore. There's so many Stephen King things
And
around.
we're
But
30 years into
not
things
this-
getting adapted.
I judge them on their own merits,
Yeah.
basically, which I guess
Yeah.
you do anyway, but still.
Also, I mean, it might have been an oversaturation thing with just proximity to it too.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Pet Cemetery,
Yeah.
It Too. I mean, all this year.
Yeah.
And Castle Rock and
Gunslinger.
Stranger
whatever,
Things,
Dark
even
Tower.
kind of.
Stranger Things is
Like-
essentially
And
just,
that's like an homage. So
yeah.
right.
It feels like that. Yeah.
Why didn't this work? I think the marketing was just awful. That's honestly my opinion. But
Yeah. I think it was Script. You know who Script Shadow is, right?
Yeah,
Jamie.
yeah.
Script Shadow. He has this article where he goes over every week how the movies did, the box office, and he was talking. He was the first one who brought up what you guys were talking about off the podcast was about the trailers don't show
Yeah, that was
what the movie is.
the movie is The Shining 2, but it's not called Shining 2. It has, out of context, the dumbest title ever.
yeah.
What was Jamie, you said that your wife...
Oh yeah, my wife asked me 3 times. My wife, a fan of horror movies.
Right,
She loves
right.
horror movies. We'd watch TV, and then an ad would come up real quick, Dr. Sleep, She'd be like, Dr. Sleep, that's a stupid title. What's that about? and I'd explain it to her. I'd say it's about Danny Torrance. He grows up. He has a further adventure, and she, oh, okay.
But she wouldn't need that if it was called The Shining,
Yeah.
Dr. Sleep.
Well,
or
not
something
only
like that.
she
yeah.
asked me that 3 times after I explained, which might be talking about her failing memory or something. But honestly,
Well, I hope not. but
I honestly had to tell her, like, explain it to her 3 times, and she was,
Yeah.
oh yeah, that's right. And she's a dumb title.
but if it was just Shining 2, yeah, it'd be fine. People,
Yeah.
I bet you would have added another 10 million at least.
or the Overlook or something.
The Overlook.
Overlook. Return to the Overlook.
Red Rum,
Red rum.
something.
Call it Red Rum. Yeah.
Danny Torrance.
Yeah.
Make it like a John Rambo
Yeah.
thing, you know?
And I
It's a-
do wonder.
Doctor Who, no. Doctor Strange, Doctor Strange Love. No,
Yeah.
Right.
I do wonder if Steven. I'm curious to see who made that decision because he
Ewan
signs off
McGregor.
on every Ewan McGregor.
He was like, damn it, I will
Steve-
not.
I-
make this
I
I
movie."
will
think
not. Steven.
he has no say in that stuff.
Are you sure?
That's a studio. That's
Yeah,
totally studio.
I would think it was the studio.
Okay.
I mean, it's possible that he has a say in that stuff because he is powerful.
That's what I mean.
But I bet you he doesn't. But has any? I bet they. I don't know. It's kind of the power of Stephen King. Has any Stephen King novel been renamed in the past? That's a question for our listeners.
great
The first listener will win
trivia.
2
I don't know.
Little Caesars pizzas. I don't know.
I don't really. I'd have to actually.
Stand By Me is called The Body.
The Body. That was the one that popped into my head.
But still, there's no marketing there for that.
And then
You know?
Shawshank Redemption is called the
Rita Hayworth.
Rita
and
Hay-
Shawshank.
and the
Rita
Shawshank,
Hayworth
yeah.
and the so
But that still doesn't apply here.
yeah.
We're talking about one of the most famous horror movies that ever was made.
It makes no sense to
And
me
you
how
don't
it's not making more money. You
Right.
talked to I mean
X-Men
you
Origins,
talk to 10
Wolverine. There's
people-
a reason.
Mhm.
Yeah.
in there.
who doesn't know The
Right.
Shining. It's so
Right.
iconic and
This has nothing to do with
recognizable.
the script. It's just
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
oh, it's
No, it's relevant. It's absolutely
it's relevant.
relevant.
They just it's such a simple thing.
And I think part of this is because most people are enjoying the movie, us included.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of puzzling. It's an interesting puzzle why this movie is really not made any money.
And I think when we start getting into, we'll get into later the logline and stuff. I think it actually is also a symptom of the movie,
there is
what
some,
it is.
Yeah, there is something instructive to take. from it.
Yes,
Mhm.
exactly.
there's something. Yeah.
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 Still, Shining 2.
Yeah. It should be. It
Take
should
off
be. It
the-
should be 50 million easy.
Here's the,
S2.
here's the thing.
Shiners.
I remember though when Doctor Sleep the book came out, and Stephen King kind of was separating it from The Shining a little
Yes.
bit, and the book's even more separated
Yes.
from The Shining.
Well,
yes.
It
so
has little to do with. Well, I wouldn't say little,
We-
but it has less to do with it.
I'm assuming anyone listening to our podcast is already going to know the history there. Like Mike Flanagan had the job of making a sequel to both a book and a movie and merging them into
He
one
did a
thing.
marvelous job.
Marvelous job. But that like this there's I don't think there's ever been a movie kind of like this before or after like
Yeah.
yet. Well, yet.
So
but you know what I
just-
mean?
just
Like
some
can you think of a
quick-
precedent for this?
But just some quick
No.
things though to talk about that. So in the book, the hotel burnt down.
right.
In the first book.
In the first
Yeah.
book,
And Scatman Crothers lives.
Scatman Crothers lived.
Yeah.
In The Shining, the book we're talking about. And there were other differences too.
Mhm.
So
It's a warm book. It has it's
Yeah.
about family.
yeah,
Yeah.
So the sequel.
You can watch the TV movie if you don't want to
Do-
read it.
Yeah.
So the Doctor Sleep book didn't have all the Shining references in it
Right.
as much to play with because there were a lot of different things that
Did you read the
happened.
book?
I did not read the book.
I did. It's
So you've read Doctor Sleep.
the Doctor Sleep.
And Jamie, you have not.
I have not read.
I
Doctor
have
Sleep.
not. Okay. So,
Okay.
so we're clear on who has
Yeah.
and hasn't. Yeah.
So keep going.
So those are the primary differences. So Flanagan was kind of his thing was he made it a sequel to the Kubrick movie, and therefore the hotel still stood. He brought other references in that the book did not bring in.
He sort of brought in the ending to the first book and made it the ending to the second
Okay.
book.
Superman 2'd it.
It's
Everything.
the
Right.
like
Yeah.
the ending. The first book is Jack Torrance like in the burning down hotel
Right,
to
that's right.
save like to
That's right.
like-
There was no
And
maze. in the
Stephen
book.
King publicly said that he now this like redeems it for him.
yeah. It's
So now Stephen King likes the Kubrick movie because of this movie.
Yeah.
it
that's
definitely
so-
tells a complete
What
story.
a weird set of circumstances for a
It's
movie.
so weird.
I wish it was a hit for that reason. It's so weird.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah.
I find that part fascinating.
And
It's really cool.
And for me at least, now it's been 5 years. I read the book 5 years ago because I think it came out in summer of 2014. I read it right when it came out.
Yeah.
I was on a kick. I was reading like a book a week. It was crazy.
What are you, smart?
I was pushing.
They were all
myself.
Russian.
right.
Philosophy.
The part of the book that's kind of I don't remember is the similar to many Stephen King books is it sort of fizzles out because it returns to the campsite where the True Knot is sort of like their home base campsite.
Yeah.
They live on the ashes of the Overlook.
So there's like some
So
evil still
they
there.
like
or
feed
something.
on it.
Yeah.
So like and it all like sort of climaxes there. So he sort of reverse engineered, given all that he had to work with between The Shining and the book, and I think it improves upon the book. I think it's like the best version of all the worlds combined.
And if he did just make a sequel to the book, that would have even been more of a disaster financially.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like,
We were
imagine,
wait, what?
imagine people getting excited for this without any Kubrick references in it.
Yeah.
It would have been a disaster.
Yeah.
Not. It could have been a good movie. I'm not saying that.
There's a ton of stuff out there with him talking about this, Mike
Yeah.
Flanagon,
'Cause
and
that
the
was the-
decisions, the decision making that we don't need to go into.
right.
But if you look out there, he explains all the decisions and all the creative choices.
I thought this was a sequel to Ready Player One. I didn't.
Isn't it kind of weird that we had these two recreations?
I have to
in
say,
the last like 3 years.
Can I say something too? I think the Ready Player One recreation was stronger than the recreation.
You mean like
in
the
this-
sets?
Just the visuals and the recreation, purely the recreation part.
Yes.
I thought Ready Player One probably did it better. I think it's a
Maybe.
lens thing and stuff
You
like
mean
that.
the aesthetics?
The aesthetic.
What's weird
I'm
though
purely
is
talking about a visual,
Yeah.
Which we
thing,
don't do in
which
the
we do
podcast.
too, but
it's very
but-
instructive for the screenwriting
yeah.
listeners.
Here, I'll say this about that because I wasn't going to bring it up, but since you're bringing it up,
yeah.
what I loved about this movie, cinematography wise, is the second we get into the Overlook, all the cinematography changes framing wise to Kubrick.
I love it.
Loved it.
Yeah.
I was like, it's such a subtle thing that is not pointed out, but it's like we go from all the standard Mike Flanagan was shooting like the rest of the movie pretty traditionally,
Yeah.
and then the second you get in there, everything's framed
Well,
right
the
down the center.
angles,
Yeah.
It's
all
fucking
the
great.
Symmetrical
But
framing
Yeah.
and stuff.
But as far as like the grain and color timing, that was still in keeping with the rest of the movie. Whereas
I
Ready
understand.
Player One
I
was
agree, I
literally
agree.
like.
It's not really a criticism.
No, I know.
just
I
noticed
was
it.
trying to give a reason for it.
Yeah.
Ready Player One was literally trying to mimic the film
Exactly.
itself.
That's a
it
great-
was trying to do a
This-
perfect impersonation.
This was doing the aesthetic version of the actors playing the other actors
Right,
from the old.
right.
That,
Yeah.
So it's not. It's like
Yeah, it's a different thing.
it's like 3/4 of the way there. You know? Yeah.
Also, a weird thing, again, not really related to the podcast, but Kubrick, when he made. when
Everybody's signing off.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, oh
When-
God!
When
We don't want to hear this.
he wanted to make a haunted house movie that didn't have the creepy vibe.
Yeah,
So and
yeah.
this movie is like the hotel's rotted and stained
Mhm.
and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
peeling. I mean, Kubrick did have some creepy
Well,
stuff in there. but
it has been closed for 40 years. So
Right.
It
No,
has to
it
look
should.
like
It's
that.
totally motivated.
it
yeah.
should. I'm just saying that gives a good reason why it might
And
not look
I was
identical to the original
expecting like a thing where he would like. I was glad this didn't happen. I was expecting like he would walk in there
movie.
and then it would all just like
Turn
CGI
back,
like
yeah.
all get cleaned up in his mind and
Ah.
turn and revert to like the
His
80s
memories.
Yeah,
again.
suddenly he's on a little tricycle.
Yeah, I was happy they didn't do anything like that. I was happy they didn't do
How
that.
do I get off?
How do I
Right,
get
right.
off this
They needed.
tricycle?
I was expecting the tricycle chase.
Yeah.
but,
Yeah.
Right.
okay.
No, I was trying
So-
to defend the Ready Player One thing.
So let's talk about Mike Flanagan.
Yes.
He's a local guy.
Yes.
We
For the listeners out there who don't know what that means, he's a local guy.
This podcast is recorded in Baltimore, Maryland.
Yes.
And we are all in the Baltimore film circles. And Mike Flanagan is one or two friends removed from all of us.
Mhm.
I'm not going to say who, because but he's not.
I will.
Go ahead. I don't care. But
So I'm good friends with John Waters. And no,
He went to the college that I went to
Towson?
a few years apart from me when it did Towson University.
I
when
sometimes
it,
teach at.
that Jamie
him.
sometimes teaches at.
Right, right.
That when I was going there and when Mike Flanagan was going there, they didn't have a film program. So, that's interesting that, he went on to these heights and he didn't even have a film program to graduate from.
I mean, and before he made his short, He's the DP on a movie of one of our friends.
Yeah, that's just.
This is all ancient history.
Okay,
yeah,
and then
so.
second, and we can bounce off of each other
Mhm.
with this. So to put it in perspective, his career trajectory, and it's very instructive, I think, for writers out there. My first feature that I co-wrote and produced, Book of Lore, in 2006, played in a film festival in California, and alongside it, his short, Oculus, and he didn't have anything else, played alongside ours, and we had just made our first feature, and he's only at the short film stage, and it was a shot-on-video short called Oculus.
It's on YouTube, I believe.
It's on YouTube.
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
on the extras of the Oculus DVD and
yeah.
Blu-ray, and it just goes to show you how quickly things can change for you. You know, in the 13 years since, he's made, I think, 6 feature films, and the Netflix
He's literally,
series.
from what friends have told me, one of his dreams was to make Gerald's Game. That was his.
Right.
Wow.
That was his
Yeah.
like when you're like we all now, we probably all in our mind have like that dream that we're like, God, I wish I could if I could do anything, I do that. He did that. And now he made the sequel to The Shining.
It's just amazing.
That's insane.
And he kickstarted. So from Oculus, he kickstarted Absentia for $23,000 at the beginning of Kickstarter. So like 2011. And then they made a feature film that was I think it's shot on video.
That's not surprising, though.
Because
Right,
Oculus
yeah.
is shot on video. So he did it himself. He created a brand for himself. And Chris McQuarrie just had that big thread about learning how to do it yourself. Like the way to get your stuff out there is I'm constantly preaching this, like the best way to kind of get your stuff seen and start a career is to just start learning how to make this stuff.
And I think with that Chris McQuarrie thing, there was even a read between the lines that making it yourself is almost insurance against the disappointment that's going to come, because if you're making it yourself and you're just doing it for that reason, then you don't care if you never get $1 billion.
Right.
Took the words right out of my mouth.
I mean, all three
I was
of
gonna
us
say, don't make stuff to become the next Mike Flanagan. You make stuff because you want to make it.
That's yeah.
That's
I'm
the
sorry.
best.
I'm
I know. No, I knew you weren't
saying that,
No,
but it's coming out like
Well,
that.
and I think that's a byproduct. No, that's
Yeah.
that's a part of his thread, because I think he basically says that's a byproduct. You're still doing the thing, but you're changing the goalposts. You know what I mean? So
That's
we're all doing the same
well
thing.
said.
We're just changing the victory conditions.
Right.
Instead of the victory conditions being somebody's going to discover me, I'm going to get an agent, whatever, it's going to be I'm going to make something. And that's what his basic idea is, I think. That's
And he
my
also
reason.
said in that thread, instead of just being grumpy and saying, well, if I had this and I had that and I could do that, do it. And it might not be the best thing even, but you still did it.
Yeah.
You still kind of lived your dream, even though it's not
Right.
the specific.
Right.
You
Yeah.
And I can say right now, I talk about this a lot. Short films have kind of made this weird comeback in the horror business in the last few years.
Yeah.
Where there are several cases you can point to people making short horror films that then went on to make movies. There's obvious ones like Mama,
Lights Out.
and Lights Out is a popular one.
Well, not his short. The Fede Alvarez.
Fede Alvarez is a little.
He
different,
made
but
that
still.
robot short, and
Yeah.
then he became a horror director. So
Right.
yeah, right, yeah.
There was a movie called The Pact not too long ago.
Yeah.
District 9.
District 9. But
Yeah.
now there's
District
Yeah.
9.
just
Wow.
last year, because I followed this stuff, but Amblin bought two different short films to make into features. Ghost House bought 2 of them. They bought the rights, and now the guys who made them are the writer directors of their first feator film.
Yeah.
And these are little 2-minute kind of horror
but
segment.
they tell a complete story because for people who don't know, I read amateur scripts all day. That's my job, and a lot of people will send me a short that they're planning on being like a proof of concept for the feature.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is it's just a scene.
Right.
It's not a proof of concept for the feature. It doesn't tell a complete story.
Yeah.
And I think you can tell a complete story in a scene. I'm not saying you can't do that.
A scene
but
should be a short film, kind of.
There
But
should,
Right.
yeah,
there
But
should
if
be a
you watch-
satisfying
yeah,
catharsis.
If
to
you
it.
watch these things like Lights Out and Oculus, the short tells a complete story. It is a movie that is 8 minutes long.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I would just say, if you are going to do that, don't take this random scene. Take something that encapsulates what you want to do on a grander scale.
As someone who like wades in shorts all the time, I definitely prefer a short that tells a complete story.
Right.
I've seen plenty of shorts that are just like a moment in time type of thing.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan. Like, yeah.
Well, and
I'm
I'm
not a
talking about
fan.
from a career
Yeah.
standpoint, trying to create your brand. It seems like these success stories that you're bringing up, are they telling complete stories?
Some of them are. I think they all have some kind of cathartic ending.
Okay.
Maybe there's a to be continued at the end.
Okay.
A lot of them are just horror scenes that give you a bit. They're almost like the teaser before the movie.
Okay,
that
so they
shows the
are
evil.
just scenes.
Well,
okay.
in some ways they are scenes.
Like, it's a guy in a room and there's something making a noise, and it turns
Right.
out the noise was him all along. Right? And that's
Imagine,
it,
just as
you
a
know?
bad example, imagine if the Drew Barrymore opening to Scream was
Yeah,
a
it's a short
complete
film.
movie.
That's a short
That's
film,
it.
though.
Right, that's a
Yeah,
short
like
film.
that's
They're sort of like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so the last plug before we get to the true screenwriting is I will say that if you make these, there's no better way to advance your screenwriting knowledge than to put something on its feet and try to film it.
Yep.
You're going to learn about transitions and pacing and too much dialogue and what works and not, and on the nose and all this stuff.
Also,
All
you're
of
gonna
that
find
will
your
just-
voice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the best way to learn about your screenwriting.
Also, making shorts can be something you enjoy doing, and that could be
Absolutely. You
at
meet
this point in time. That could also be an end goal.
yes.
Yeah.
Meet
We've got the internet, YouTube, Amazon Prime. You can make shorts. That could be what you do.
Yeah.
I know.
And they're
I'm
out
gonna be
there
that guy.
forever, and that's what's great.
Right.
Like, yeah.
I
I am constantly preaching to people like who are stuck, and they're like, "What do I do?" Like they're asking me questions.
Yeah.
Asking the wrong questions. Like, how do I sell my script? Well, have you tried making something first, since you're not getting any progress, and seeing what comes from that, and the relationships that are grown from those
Right.
those experiences that lead to bigger things and lead to somebody like, what kind of scripts do you have? Like, let me check it out. So, yeah, give it a shot.
This was off brand for us, but I think it was a good discussion
Dude.
to have with Flanagan and everything.
Yes,
he's
yes.
an inspiration.
An inspiration.
He's an inspiration, and just make stuff. Don't expect the worst, hope for the best.
I absolutely didn't mean to frame it like you should hope to be Mike Flanagan. I'm just saying he's a great
Do
example
what he
of
did.
what could happen.
Make a Stephen King movie.
Yeah, just make a movie, and then you'll get this to do the biggest sequel that flopped.
Most of the shorts I see of people who I know are making stuff to get noticed, I don't like.
Mhm.
But the people who are just making stuff because they really wanted to make that short,
Yeah.
those are the ones I love.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? So that's what I was trying to say. That's all.
Gotcha.
Yeah. It's like, it's like this is going to be my ticket. This is going to be my calling card.
I don't mean that.
Calling cards, I hate. Anyway.
So jumping in is Dr. Sleep. It's a weird movie in some
Weird
ways.
movie.
It's a weird cheeseburger.
A weird
in some ways.
cheeseburger.
So
And what is a cheeseburger, real quick, so we can remind our audience?
A
when we say that?
Popeye's chicken sandwich. No.
When we say cheeseburger, we just mean like the standardized movie with a normal
3-act structure,
big movie.
fun and games,
Making movies for Friday night, making money, that kind of thing.
extremely digestible and easy.
And appeals to many people,
Yes.
not just a certain niche target
Right.
audience.
Like normal blockbuster Hollywood movies.
Most of what we talk about on
Cheeseburgers.
this podcast
Most
is
of what we talk
cheeseburgers.
about.
Right.
Except
Like-
maybe adaptation. That was the only one that might not have been
Yeah.
a cheeseburger.
There's a reason we're not going to have a Lars von Trier episode because you can't talk about that script.
That's right. God.
Right.
Okay.
Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So for that, what do you think? And it's a horror movie. The Shining was obviously a monster in the house movie, as far as Blake Snyder calls it. So the
Yes.
Save the Cat model, he has these different genres: monster in the house, full triumphant, out of the bottle, and they're patterns that many movies have that you can kind of follow. They're like kind of the 10, or I can't remember how many he has, the 10 different types of stories that are told over and over again. And one of them is Monster in the House, which is usually a horror movie. The Shining has one of these. And Monster in the House elements usually are there is a monster, so the ghosts or whatever in the hotel. There's usually a house,
Or
the
just the
hotel,
hotel
in
itself.
The Shining,
Yeah.
and the evil inside of it.
Yeah.
And then there's usually a sin that brings about the evil. In The Shining, what would you say? There's a couple things I could see.
I think they're the same in both movies.
Okay.
It's addiction.
Okay, yeah. So it's definitely, that element.
I saw an interview where Ewan McGregor and Mike Flanagan said this movie, whereas The Shining's about addiction, this movie is about recovery.
Right.
Okay.
So that was kind of the theme.
Yeah,
there.
definitely.
That's
And
the theme
we're
there.
going to talk about
So-
that.
Yeah.
So is is Dr. Sleep a monster in the house? What do you think?
So it's tough. It's messy.
It's messy.
Because I think there is a house and it's their minds.
Yeah.
Which is
And
very common. They
When you
can
say
be
yeah.
there, who do
psychological.
you mean?
I mean, Dan, Abra, even the True Knot, and their minds, specifically Rose, and I think the house is inside the mind, but it's not
Mind,
consistent.
we'll call it mind space.
Mind
How's that?
space. That's
Mind
good.
space.
Yeah, maybe the
Yeah.
dream,
Mhm.
Doctor Sleep.
Mhm.
Maybe the dream state is the house.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Because
It's not an easy answer.
no,
It's not.
It's
No.
not. It's
So-
really not.
When I was watching, I was struggling with this for a couple reasons. It
Yeah.
sort of becomes more of a monster in the house as time goes on.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
pretty directly.
Yeah,
Right,
pretty directly.
Yeah.
But I was almost thinking, and I was debating. I'm like, is this one? I can't tell. And honestly, in the beginning, and this is maybe something audience members might find uncomfortable, doesn't feel like The Shining in the first half of the movie.
not
it
at
doesn't
all.
have
No,
this,
it doesn't
you know,
at
it doesn't
all.
feel like the same genre or anything. Which isn't a problem, but maybe that is a problem to people that saw that trailer.
Yeah.
Shining, 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 and they go to the movie. It's like, where's
It's that catch-22. It's
Uh.
like it is a totally different movie.
totally different?
Yeah.
Which I think
But-
is why we like it.
Yeah.
You know, that's
Why-
why it's not just the same
You don't have to
beats.
redo The Shining.
Yeah,
The
Yeah.
Shining's
we've
been
seen The
done.
Shining.
It's done. Did.
Yeah.
We've
Right.
seen, we've seen the miniseries. We've seen the rip-offs. We've
Right.
seen all.
Yeah.
all.
Right.
But so I was debating while I was watching, and again, this is just usually the way genres are used are to help you write a story.
Yes, it's
Yeah,
a construction technique.
Yeah,
yes.
it helps you brainstorm because you're
Yeah.
like, do I have that element? Do I need it? Like,
Yeah.
what types of things are found?
This functions to me like almost a vampire movie.
Well,
Yes.
or
A little bit.
in some ways, like I was even a lot of times it reminded me of Near Dark,
Yes.
but the protagonist isn't the same.
Yeah.
you know, Near Dark.
Yeah,
I think
it's got pieces
it's
of
very
it.
similar.
It's not exactly the same, but
Yeah.
it definitely
It's
gave me that.
traveling, you know,
Yeah,
vampires.
yeah.
Kind of
No,
thing.
that's why I started to fall in love with it. I was like, this
Yeah.
is giving me some
It's-
some vibes here that I was
Yeah. I
think
not
I
expecting.
think in Near Dark, the heroes are part of the traveling
Yeah,
band,
you're
right.
so
Yes.
it's a little
Yes.
different
It's
in that
different.
way.
Yes.
I honestly started to think of it, and I'm not sure. There's no right or wrong answer. This is all. Like,
Yeah.
But I was thinking it could even be like a superhero.
It
genre.
has a lot of superhero elements.
Because it
Yeah.
feels like I don't know how much he arcs after his initial arc. He kind of becomes a good person.
He being Danny.
Danny.
Okay.
And it almost feels like a superhero story where he's that guy but doesn't want to do the thing. And then once he does it, he pretty much just goes for it. And
He's
he
like
has
the John
most of the
McClane
right.
of Shining.
Yeah, and it almost feels like
Yeah.
a lot of superhero origin stories, even though this isn't a total origin story, it's almost like the recovery.
Yeah.
It's kind of this thing where they become who they are, and then at the midpoint, the real story kicks off.
Yeah.
And that's almost what this movie
That
felt
is
like at times.
Yeah.
Like, okay, now the villain's aware of them, and they have to deal with that.
Yeah.
And now they have to use their superpower to destroy the villain.
Right.
And it like Spider-Man or something. You
Yeah.
know, the first half of the movie is getting bit by the radioactive spider, denying it, wondering
Right.
what's up. And
Yeah.
at the midpoint, it's like, oh, Green Goblin's in town. I got to deal with Green Goblin. And the B story is the Green Goblin. You follow the
Yeah.
Green Goblin doing their thing or something.
Right.
Superman the same way. You know, you follow Luthor in the back.
Right.
Luthor.
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 Mr.
That was
Luthor.
weird.
That's a Luthor.
Luthor.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, you follow we'll call him Lex in the background.
Yeah.
And then at the midpoint they become they intersect and
They
they start the
start-
battle.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So in some ways, and again, there's no right or wrong answers to
Yeah.
this. But in some ways, if I was like breaking the story in an outline and I was like trying to figure out I had this villainous group and I had this guy going through recovery and they're not even aware of each other. Maybe it's this other thing, you know,
Yeah.
as a whole movie.
Yeah.
But then it has elements of Monster in the House later.
And
because
it brings
once
them
they-
in. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's really no right or wrong answer. But anyway, that was where I was.
The superhero one is I didn't think either of you were going to bring that up. But
that's
I mean,
the whole time I
felt
thought
like,
vampires and superheroes. I was like, these are two things I did not expect
yeah.
at all.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
It reminded me a lot, and I'll come back to this when we get into some of our later points. It reminded me a ton of Luke's story in The Last Jedi.
Oh.
He's like,
wow.
he's
Yeah, I
not,
see that.
he's
Jimmy just wants people to be
he's
pissed at this
dis-
podcast.
he's disconnected from the
Drinks
shine.
blue milk.
He's been doing
Right.
everything.
Got a booze.
He's been, drinks the blue milk as the booze.
That's the booze, right? Yeah.
He's doing everything in his power to not use his power,
That's a
and
good
he's
call.
completely disconnected. And I think that this movie is saying, especially the second time I saw it, I went back.
He had a
Again.
boyhood trauma with his father. Yeah.
Shit.
Yeah.
No, Dan is doing everything in his power to not use his shine.
Well, yeah,
And-
Obi-Wan's in this movie.
Yeah,
right?
I know. That's and Obi-Wan,
God.
it's meta. Bob is so mad right now.
No, I'm not. I just didn't even think
There's
about
a Holoran
that.
Force
Yeah,
Ghost.
I know.
as
You're
Yoda.
right. You're right.
Halloran
You're right.
is Obi-Wan.
You're right.
No, but and the story is kind of saying that because Dan has refused to use his shine, he has allowed the true knot to grow into power. And like, I think this story is saying that if Dan had gotten recovered earlier, all these kids he would have gotten rid of the true knot. Like he's on par with Abra. He's just so damaged he doesn't have as much
He's
strength.
rusty and damaged.
Yeah.
He
So
hasn't
I mean,
touched
and
it.
like,
And
dude,
she's Ray.
and that's what I'm saying. It's so no. The
I see
second
it.
time,
I'm
the second
convinced.
time,
No,
I was like,
I'm
holy
not
shit.
disagreeing.
It's
I'm
so
laughing.
much like Luke and Ray in The Last Jedi, and the midpoint is the same. The midpoint is
I was literally saying to Jimmy before you got
I know,
here
that's why I'm
how annoyed I am at people shitting on The Last Jedi in their Mandalorian reviews.
I'm saying that I'm using this in a positive.
I know, but I was just saying, like, God, I can't stand people talking about The Last Jedi.
I'm
anymore.
sorry.
No, it's fine.
No,
It's great.
but like
it's a good
and
point.
And the midpoint
It has
is
validity.
the same. In the midpoint of The Last Jedi, Luke uses the Force for the first time to reach out to Leia. In the midpoint of this, he uses the Shine for the first time to talk to Abra. It's the exact same midpoint.
Well, you know
Yeah.
what? You know what's interesting?
Yeah,
And then
you're right.
from
Yeah,
there,
you're
he
right.
starts using his powers. He
just-
fucking astral projects.
Yeah.
It's like so.
And
God, I didn't even think of that. Jesus. Okay.
Stephen King's such a hack. No, he ripped it off before he saw the movie. But I think that's really instructive because you wouldn't call Last Jedi a monster in the house. It doesn't feel like
right.
one.
Yeah.
So I think that's the point. Horror movies aren't always monster in the house movies.
Right. That's what we're trying to.
And monster in the
make
house
point
movies
here.
aren't always horror movies.
Right.
Like what about Bob or something? Could be a monster.
Yeah, monster in the
movie.
house.
Um,
Yes.
good
Oh
cable
god, that's
guy.
a
Good pull.
great
Yeah, cable
guy,
example.
Yeah.
All kinds of movies like that.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
it's
Obsessive weirdos.
Yes.
And I think
Right.
that speaks to the power. If you're interested in checking these genres out in the Blake Snyder books, that's why they're useful because they're not so obvious. Like, oh, this is a formula to make a horror movie.
And for those
It's
who
just
don't know,
storytelling.
it's the second book. Blake Snyder, Save the Cat Goes,
Goes
to the Movies.
That
Yeah.
both books
also,
really talk
like,
about
would it would
from
also
that
fall into this
example.
genre like any movie where the person is it's not like I think it like Paranormal Activity, how it's the person that has the demon attached to them, not you know what I mean? Like no
Mhm.
matter where they go, they
Yeah.
are being tormented. It is not the location; it's their actual being.
They're being.
You know what I mean? It's still Monster in
Well,
the House, but there's no actual
Right.
house that matters.
So
Right.
that's
right?
Yes.
That's what you guys are saying.
Yeah, and speaking to the house part, so this was my uncomfortableness watching this movie a little bit
Right.
because I'd seen The Shining. The Shining's a very tense movie.
Right, it's
I'm
all
very
tense.
I'm
Yeah.
like knotted up watching The Shining. Like that's me watching The Shining.
It's all tone.
This movie didn't have a lot of tension for me, and that said, I still really like the movie, but I was expecting the tension. I didn't get that because, and I'll tell you a couple reasons why. One, I don't think it has a defined house. I think he could have avoided the horror if he chose to.
Yeah, a drama. This
And-
would have been a great drama.
And so could what's her name? I'm sorry,
Abra?
Ray.
Right.
No, I just yeah.
Well-
She could have also avoided the
Had
drama.
her
There-
own.
There was
yeah.
you guys usually bring it up. You do. There was kind of a why now aspect to it, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I was also asking why now.
That's tied totally into it. They are not trapped. There's
Right.
not a lock into the thing for a really.
I
long
don't
time.
mind
Yeah.
it not
No,
having that.
I'm just saying it is
Yeah.
different. It is.
It's-
That's why
it's
it
such a-
feels.
and I think
It's
that's what I
such
like
a
about it in
different
some weird
movie
way.
than The Shining.
Yes.
It's it does. It's like
Yeah.
not on brand as far as tone at all.
I'll even go one further. That was kind of a weird tension thing for me for a horror writer or horror making
Yeah.
is, well, we get the POV of the villain, and we actually kind of like the villain. I mean,
Mhm.
she's scary in some ways, but she's not really scary. I mean, she's bad. We kind of, she, you know, the whole group of them are kind of, they're okay. It's kind of like Near Dark where they have their problems. But I'd also say that the heroes seem more powerful than the villain at times.
Mhm.
And that's a weird thing to do for tension. It shifts the tension where I almost felt like they had the upper hand most of the movie, if not all of the movie.
You mean the naivete of the true not thinking they're more powerful, and we as the audience have the superior position
'cause
that
we-
they're more powerful.
We know
than
that
the true
Abra
not.
and Danny
Yes.
can like kind of like just destroy them.
They kicked their ass.
Yeah, they kicked their
and
ass.
they always
so,
had
yeah.
a plan. They always like, you know, there was really never a time where I feared for
And
Abra
standardly, yeah.
which is weird for a horror
Horror
movie,
movie.
quote unquote.
Yeah.
It's a weird tension angle for
I
a horror
think
movie.
why it works. There's many things, and I want to get back to some of the other monster in the house elements too, because I think they're really
We have
good.
some more stuff we
Yeah.
gotta talk about. Yeah.
This is not on the beat on the talking points is right. I think why it works is they show us in graphic detail the end that we fear for Abra so much that we have this like we know what it looks like if they
with the little boy.
with the little boy with Violet they hint at it, and then with the little boy. So like even though there's like this feeling that Abra and Dan are more powerful, it's like if things go wrong, we know exactly how much she's gonna suffer, and I think that like is
can I
very
add,
powerful.
I want to add on too that while I agree with what Jamie said,
Mhm.
I also think that this is a story where I can totally believe that Danny and Abra. Number one, Abra, she has no clue what she actually is.
Yes.
Not until the end.
Right. I
And
agree.
Danny has no confidence in himself. I mean,
Right.
this is
He's
so that's-
ashamed. Yeah.
That's the like. It's obvious to the audience that if these two can lock in their power and learn to do, have that the
Yeah.
Captain Marvel moment, like,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
like they're totally in control. But we don't have that until the, what
Yeah.
I would say almost at the Overlook.
yeah,
right.
that's right.
So that kind of they could beat them, but they don't know the extent of their actual power.
that's right.
So that kind of sells it for me there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
But I think what Jamie's
Right?
bringing up is really
No, I
interesting
think it's a
and
valid
true.
point.
Yeah, no, it's
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
it's kind of fascinating to me that and again, that's
It's
why
not a tense movie.
it's not a very tense movie.
I
Not
think-
until the end.
I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
this. It's like what's great
But I think
is
he was saving it for the end.
I
yeah,
think
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
That's why.
Right?
I think it's kind of it reminds me of Jaws in that way.
Yeah,
where the
yeah.
third
Oh,
act's
yeah.
really big.
Yeah.
like the third act's the whole reason he wanted to make
Yeah.
the movie.
And the,
of it.
and the first
Exactly.
2/3 is
Yeah.
people hanging out talking about sharks.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. But I wanted to talk about the sin a little more.
Yeah.
Do you want to? You do a great job of like explaining the
Sin.
The
Yeah,
sin,
with the
the
sin.
so
theories,
the sin is
the
usually
techniques.
yeah. The sin is usually just, and it really is one of the eye-opening things about the monster in the house. It's kind of obvious once you see it, but most of these movies have some thematic sin that is the heroes do. Sometimes it's not there. Sometimes it's like we
Before the story started,
yeah,
even
we built a house on top of
Yeah.
graveyards,
Right.
gravestones.
The
It's-
kids at Crystal Lake had sex.
exactly.
Yeah.
it's
Right.
it's
Yeah,
simple
yeah,
stuff
yeah.
like that.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
and that's all the sin really is. But most horror movies, almost all of them, all the good ones at least, have some sin. And,
And
sometimes
What's the
it's
sin in the
metaphor.
original Shining?
I think it's addiction. I
The-
think
the alcohol
and
addiction.
not just from Jack, but from the other people, the ghosts that you meet and you hear about who they are and their stories.
Addiction or abuse or something there.
Abuse,
Something.
yeah,
Yeah, they
yeah,
got
yeah.
something
I mean,
there.
they have Dan and Jack have almost the exact same character makeup.
Yeah.
For this, I was like struggling, and then once I hit it, I was like, yeah, it's pretty obvious. And usually, the sin will be expressed in many different ways, like
Yeah.
through many different characters, through like set pieces, through situations. And in this one, I think what it is, because like I want to make it clear, like I don't think anybody here is saying that like addiction is a sin, quote unquote.
Sure,
but it's from
no.
like a cinematic standpoint.
We're
So,
talking like in script terms.
right, like
here.
so. I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
I think the phrasing is more like recklessness and irresponsibility caused by allowing addiction to control you and to control your life. And if you look at like all the story, Abra brings on the monster because she refuses to stop looking in. She's abusing her power, so she's sort of like drunk on her new power, and all she has to do to keep herself safe is to stop looking in, but she can't because she wants to help this boy, and she
So
wants to
curiosity
stop.
killed the cat.
So exactly,
Yeah.
But that's because she's abusing her power. It's addiction, and then Dan's addiction kept him from like nurturing Abra, from like finding Abra, nurturing others, and kept him from like stopping the True Knot all these years because he allowed his addiction to control his shine, and then the True Knot's out of control addiction is what leads to their demise because they can't stop themselves. They're like addicted to steam. I mean, if you watch those scenes, it's all shot like they're snorting coke.
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah, they're like
it's
drug addicts. Yeah.
They are like, it's like a band
sure.
of addicts who are,
I would assume the book would even probably use that imagery,
oh,
right?
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Like
Stephen
it's-
King.
I
Yeah.
just,
Stephen King.
Come on.
Yeah.
and so like in order to defeat Rose and the True Knot, how's Dan gonna shine? He's got to overcome like his demons and like control his addiction. Like, so it's all about like recovery, like you said.
Right.
Yeah, there's a certain amount of it too. I really don't have an answer. I think that's a good point. It's with great power comes great responsibility.
You know, I really felt
Well,
that.
for
yes.
Danny especially.
And
For
in the end,
Danny,
Abra.
Her,
You think-
it's figuring out the balance. Like, what do I do with
But
this
they're
power?
abusing their power in wrong
In
ways.
the beginning, she's
One-
abusing her. Abra is abusing
Danny
her power.
doesn't live up to his potential, whereas she is like almost abusing it.
Yeah, they're
Right,
both
yeah,
sides of the
right.
And then the
coin.
bad
Yeah,
guys
yeah,
are totally
Absolutely.
abusing it
Totally.
for immortality.
And that's it's
Right.
all expressions of that.
and-
Yeah.
And usually, when we talk about good villains,
So it's
and Rose,
responsibility is basically what
Responsibility
we're
to an
all
extent.
circling around is
I think
responsibility.
in the
Yeah,
addiction
sure.
case,
Yeah.
he's using the addiction to deny his responsibility.
Avoid responsibility. Yeah.
And I think so when you have great villains,
But he also didn't know of this world as much.
he
He did,
He knew
and he
about-
refused to
Acknowledge
acknowledge
it, I guess.
he just
And
kind of
yeah.
locked them away in the boxes.
that. Yeah,
and then,
yeah. He's
Well, I
been.
meant the True Knots
I
at the very
see.
beginning.
Yeah.
I'm saying he would have
Yeah.
like a few like maybe a year later. In 1981, if
I'd also
they would have come.
side
hunting
note,
him.
I'd love to count how many times Steven Spielberg has depicted memories as file cabinets in your brain. How many times has he done that? It seems
You mean
like
Stephen King.
Stephen
He
King.
said Spielberg.
Oh, Spielberg. Sorry. Yeah, it seems like I can think of like 5 movies where it's all depicted as your head is a room filled with filing cabinets.
Yeah,
Right, yeah.
SSD in
SSD,
Dream-
right,
Yeah, yeah,
Dreamcatcher,
same shit,
right.
different day.
When you
Yeah.
write as
yeah.
much as him, you gotta
have
rip
that
yourself
filing
off.
cabinet
Yeah.
imagery, right?
Um,
Yeah.
But man, so yeah.
So, and then I was gonna say
That's a hard question.
Yeah, I was going to say about the villains. Villains, when you make a good villain in these kind of movies, so a good villain often, number one, you always hear the thing that the villain is the hero of their story, right? But one thing I often hear of with villains is that they're very similar to the hero, but they're kind of the hero without any moral qualms about just
Mhm.
doing the thing.
Spot
Yeah.
on.
And that's exactly what we
see here.
It's like
Yeah.
these kind of polar
Yeah,
opposites.
Yeah.
So then you can kind of, let's say the theme is about responsibility and how to use the power and that stuff. You can kind of wage a debate over the course of a movie. One side is doing this, one side's doing that, and another side is doing that. And then, come to a happy medium in the end,
Right.
or somebody finds the
Yeah.
balance. And that's where you
And
land.
whoever wins out, yeah. And the villain is also there to teach the audience and the character a lesson. And they're like the opposite side of the lesson. And sometimes their side might look a little more attractive and like win out in the argument.
Right.
Sometimes the actual piece might have you actually start like Black Panther or something. Have you start to actually the audience sympathizes with the actual villain.
Absolutely.
I don't think that happens here since they're eating kids, but
I think that's the one down tick.
Yeah, that's
it's-
it. Yeah.
Those rooting influencers, and I didn't break down the rooting influencers.
how
for
dare
that.
you, Jimmy? Everyone's
But-
favorite.
We talked about in the last
In the last
episode, for
episode,
those who
yeah.
didn't listen, rooting influencer techniques, and they are ways that you get the audience, things that you have the character experience or do that makes the audience care about them.
And the True Knots have
they
some.
have
They have 'em.
and then
And
you
then they-
can use them and you can manipulate the audience that way by giving them the rooting influencers and then suddenly turning them on their head. And
Well, if there
that's
was,
what
like-
this one does.
If there was like
an
an anti-rooting influencers list, the top number one is like violently killing a child.
Well, so it's the opposite, right? Loves
right?
kids, kills kids.
Kills kids.
And if you flip that over, loves
Right,
kids,
right.
that's a rooting influencer. So if
Yeah.
you take those same rooting influencer strategies and you reverse them, that's how you get like a feeling of hate and scare and fear over a character. But I found a quote from Rebecca Ferguson, who plays Rose, and it speaks exactly to what we were just talking about. I didn't put my finger on the responsibility aspect of it, but I really do think that addiction is like staving off responsibility. Now that you're saying that,
yeah.
It's all
she
tied in.
said, I loved the human aspect of Rose the Hat. What she just wants to do is love, support, and serve her family. And that's responsibility, you know? And that's like this aspect of them that we're like, we understand. You at least understand why they're doing what they're doing.
Right.
And that's like,
It's
that's
clear
powerful.
cut.
Yeah.
It's not confusing.
Yeah. I love
Yeah.
that. Yeah. I think that's
Yeah.
what makes them great villains. Yeah.
And they also they're cool.
They are. They're
That's another
interesting.
thing. I know it's a small thing, but like Danny's kind of a bummer. You know,
he's kind of boring.
He's boring.
Yeah.
He's boring addict.
He
bummer.
works on kids' trains and lives in an attic.
Right.
Yeah.
He's
With
kind
no
of a
TV.
bummer. Whereas they're like these cool, like, you know,
Yeah.
Fleetwood Mac. Something.
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
like a traveling. Yeah, they're a traveling band. Of,
Yeah.
roadies. Like they're
Yeah.
cool people. So in the outline is a good question. You wrote, I think it was you. Is there a half man?
Yeah.
That's a good question.
So Half Man is monster,
Thank
another
you.
monster in the house element that's not always there, but usually there, and it's usually somebody that's encountered the beast, and sometimes that beast has literally left them torn in half.
And the most famous one we always point to is Quint.
That's where the
Quint.
label
Quint.
came from. It's another Blake Snyder term.
It's another one that's part of the monster in the
Quint
house.
from Jaws is a half man.
half man.
They're often a mentor. They often know how to, like I said, they've dealt with the beast. They might have a plan how to defeat it. something
Right.
like
And
that.
it's pretty obvious. I mean, I would say it's pretty obvious
Yeah.
that it's Danny, right?
I think it's Dick.
You think it's Dick?
I think by the end, Danny
Really?
is the half man. Oddly enough, I don't think Dan is the half man. In
Really?
This story. No, I don't.
Okay.
I think
I'm listening.
I think he still is sort of in naivete Abra mode
Right.
until the end.
Until the
And-
end?
'Cause
Yeah.
I think Dick knows the bigger picture, the
Yeah.
wider world.
I mean, Dick got killed.
Yeah, Dick is killed, right.
He's a half man, and he warns him about bigger forces and more evil and stuff. He's
Right.
he's got his eye on the higher thing. I think he was the half man in the first
In the
movie,
first
too.
one, he's
He is the- yeah, he's
still
the half man.
I wrote down on the paper. Sorry, Bob. I wrote Dick Obi-Wan Halloran because like he was alive
I mean,
in the
he's
first
also-
movie,
yeah.
and now he's a ghost.
He's a
in
Force
the second
ghost.
movie.
Yeah.
He's a shine ghost now.
He's a shine ghost,
Yeah.
right? And
God,
yeah.
it could just be the Force. It
No, I
really
know.
could, yeah.
The shine is the Force.
The shine is the Force.
But and he gives I always look how I'm defining the half man
Yeah,
for
yeah,
me
yeah.
from a construction standpoint is who's gonna give the praise of the killer speech and who has the knowledge and experience to give the praise of the killer speech.
Which Danny he does have that, but he
does.
doesn't do
You
it.
know where he gets it from though? He's just
Dick.
spouting what Dick says.
Mhm.
Yeah, and like
I guess
the
that makes
things
sense, too,
that he
'cause
says to
Danny was
Abra,
what age in The Shining? He's what?
he's
5,
like-
6?
6,
Yeah,
5,
he's-
something.
So yeah, I mean, he probably
Yeah, and he
the
has-
trauma is all he can remember. He can't remember
and he-
specifics.
And he shut out the shine ever
Right,
since.
right.
So he's
Yeah.
only had like that one experience.
yeah,
Now he has had a lifetime of putting them in the boxes.
Right.
So in that sense, he
That's
has.
true.
he's
Yeah.
constantly tortured by the.
He's constantly tortured.
He's
Yeah.
like the half man of Shining,
Yes.
Yes.
He's the half man
Man
of
of
Shining, but
Shining.
in this movie,
but he's not the half man of like the specifics of what's happening in the story. Right.
right.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
the praise of the killer speech, it took us like 30 episodes to bring it up once, and I feel like we've done it like 10 times since. This is something I learned in a Robert McKee horror seminar, and it's basically and it works in comedies, it works in dramas, it works in any genre, whoever the antagonist is. There's someone who's wise and has experience with the antagonist, and for horror movies, it's usually somebody who's like survived the monster, like you said. And
Quint.
Quint, yeah.
Yeah.
And they give like Quint's, I mean, the Indianapolis
The
is
Indianapolis
the ultimate
speech.
praise of the killer speech.
Yeah. Jaws is kind of the blueprint for all
yeah,
this. Man.
And Dick gives one of my favorite Praise of the Killer speeches I've heard in a very long time, and it's like the perfect.
Yeah.
It warns the character and the audience about the power of the villain that they're trying to face, and he says, "If these empty devils ever found you when you was a tyke, you'd be dead. They eat screams and drink pain, and they notice that little girl. They might kill her, might turn her, or might keep her until she's all used up, and that would be worst of all. You can't let them." It's like, ooh, yes.
Yeah,
I mean, and from then on, like, the audience and Dan understands, like, okay, like, we have to do something about this. That's the moment that changes Dan's mind.
Right.
Yeah,
'Cause he
like
realizes,
the praise of the killer speech.
He has. It's his personal lock-in, right?
Mhm.
Yes.
When he actually decides to do something,
Which is pretty late in the movie.
Oh my God.
How late was that? Like
54 minutes.
Oh wow, you were keeping track of the time.
That's why I went back the second time.
Oh wow.
Time
Okay.
it.
So
Yes.
I mean, if
wow.
we jump to that, the weird structure. a
Yeah,
little
let's
Yeah,
jump
weird
to it.
structure. Yeah, do that.
So 54 minutes, that's the lock-in. So when we talk about structure, I like to figure out what the lock-in, basically meaning the moment where the hero has a goal, there's an obstacle in the way, there's some big stakes, if they don't accomplish the goal. And the hero, it's kind of a point of no return. Like the hero has to do something or decides to do something.
Right.
And there's no turning back, really. And that one happens at 54 minutes in. How long is that movie? 2.5 hours?
Yeah,
maybe?
a little bit.
With a long
It's actually
third act.
longer than The Shining.
Yeah, with a
Yeah.
long third act.
Yes.
It's a weird lopsided movie in that it kind of has a long third act.
So we don't need to go into like complete logline construction, but what do you think the logline of this is?
and when I try to figure out the
Kinda
logline,
complex.
when I try to figure out the logline, I always try to figure out who the hero is, what the goal is, what the obstacle and the stake. So question number one is, who's the hero of this movie?
well,
Abra.
It in some ways it could
be Abra or it could be Dan. I think the like Pet Cemetery we were talking about in the Pet Cemetery podcast, the like commercial logline of this is
I mean, I can pull up the commercial log.
yeah,
line.
it's like Dan.
Well,
It's
hold
about
on.
Dan helping Abra.
It's probably very vague.
It's about Dan
helping.
helping Abra,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
and it's that lock in.
Yeah,
54 minutes.
right.
Like Stott helping her.
Yeah, if
Years following the events of The Shining, a now adult Dan Torrance must protect a young girl with similar powers from a cult known as the True Knot, who prey on children with powers to remain immortal.
Yeah.
Right.
That's it.
There you
So-
go.
That's it.
54-minute mark. And what this movie I think does, for better or worse, and I could almost argue another version of it that doesn't do this, but it has a lot of almost like biopic like history
Right.
where it jumps super quick from cradle to grave almost.
Yeah.
It has to do that thing. So we have to get a quick hit of him in bar fights and
Yeah.
stealing people's money. And then we get a quick hit of, hey, I want to recover. Then he's recovered. Then he's,
Yeah.
so it's super fast. And if it was a biopic, we'd be like, that damn Bohemian Rhapsody story.
Right.
It's like a Lifetime movie. They go through it fast enough that it's never boring. And we're interested because it's Danny Torrance, But that part of it,
The
I
question
think,
is, does it
pushes
work for someone who hasn't
Why
seen
does
The
this?
Shining?
Yeah, I want to talk
Yeah.
about. Does it work? The first half.
I was a little worried about the movie in the first half. I was like, uh-oh, what is this movie? I didn't know anything about it, and I didn't even know that log line, so I didn't even know where it was going.
Yeah.
the True Knot or
So
anything.
I've never read the book. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I never heard of the True Knots in my life. I didn't read the book. I didn't know.
And they are equally terrifying in the book,
For
which I
all
was
I-
excited that they captured them so well.
For all I knew, this was him going back to the hotel for the entire movie.
Me too.
That's
Wow.
I literally thought that's what I was getting. The poster is a shot of
I know.
the tricycle.
How about
The
that?
marketing for this movie is a mess.
Yeah.
It's just such a mess. But I had no clue this was going to be like them in the woods shooting people. I was like, okay.
That part was a little weird to me, but we'll get to that.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
that was weird. But the tone, I like the fact that it's not that movie.
I like
I-
the weirdness.
I
Yeah.
broke
Weird,
down.
so-
I think this is a 5-act movie.
okay.
Okay.
But I'm with
By,
you, man.
by the way,
I'm
one
with you.
one
Yeah.
thing I thought watching this movie was maybe this is a movie that should have been a season of television.
Oh my God! It felt like
Yeah.
it would
It's
have been
such
a
a TV
great
show.
Such a
TV
TV
show.
show, yeah.
Oh my
I'm
gosh!
kind of happy it's not though,
No.
because I don't think it
It
needs to be
tells
another
a
4 hours
great-
long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I'm fine with a long movie as long as there's a reason.
Yeah.
yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I just think the biopic aspects of it if stretched out, would have worked for me better than they
Maybe.
worked here in a
But
quick.
then it's a
top.
series.
It is.
I want things to be a movie. I'm
And then
sorry.
you'll be-
you know?
then
I
you'll
know
just be
what
like,
you mean.
You know,
Yeah.
like, why can't they get to episode 7 when they get to the Overlook or whatever? You know?
Also, everything now is a damn TV show.
Yeah, I know.
I don't want to watch
true.
The Shining
No, it's
TV
true.
show.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
5
go ahead,
acts.
go ahead,
Okay,
go ahead.
So, okay. And I timed them because I'm ridiculous. The first act I'm saying is the prologue. And it's so funny because the first time I watched this, that lock-in, I was like, man, this lock-in is really late. Because we've been doing this so many times, you sort of get used to looking for the when's the lock-in? That's going to be the end of Act 1. Well, no.
What do we say the definitive lock-in is on this?
The lock-in, Jamie explained it earlier. It's when Marty has to get back to the future. He's now in 1955.
No,
In
not
this
the
one, in
concept
this one.
of this movie.
Oh, it's when he learns. It's red rum.
Right.
I'm saying
It's the red rum. Okay.
Red rum.
And we'll get there. I'll
No,
break it
I'd
down.
say that was.
I think
what,
that-
that's once
red
the-
rum is
that's
when
the-
he
That's the
learns.
past coming back.
And
But-
that's
right?
when he has
Yeah.
a problem he has to fix.
And by
the
the,
overall
by the
problem.
way, usually the lock-in is when you can state that log line you just read off IMDb.
That's what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
yeah.
It's
It's like-
54 minutes.
It usually takes that long to figure out what story you're in is
Right.
when the lock-in comes. And it usually comes around minute 25.
Right. It's about 25% usually. It doesn't have to
But
be.
the red
We've
rum
talked about
moment
the late
seems
lock-in.
like the moment where you believe Danny's actually going to move his ass.
That's the first
Yes.
time he knows
Yeah.
there's a
he has
threat.
he has a mission at that moment.
Right.
Right.
That's when it becomes
Yeah.
a commercial movie.
Right,
Okay,
right.
so the first act I'm saying is the prologue, 1980. It's 13 minutes long. That whole section with Danny and his mom it doesn't feel like 13 minutes to me,
No,
but I
it didn't feel
timed
that
it. It's 13 minutes.
Speaking of short films,
Yeah.
it's like the
That's
little
a
short
short film.
the short film of what happened
And-
after The Shining.
And it
Mhm.
sets up.
Yeah.
There's the scene on that scene is crucial on the bus bench or wherever bench, the beach bench with where Dick comes,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
Dick. It sets up all the questions. It sets up. Dick's like, one day you're gonna teach somebody, and he's like, no, I am not. I'm not gonna do that. And he's like, okay, I want you to know this box. I want you to learn this box. And if anybody comes to get you, since you're not willing to shine anymore, at least you can learn how to capture them and keep them from harming you. But it
Right.
sets up the big questions for Dan's character, which is all of these are introduced in the prologue. Will Dan ever shine again? Because he says he won't, and the whole movie builds to that.
Right.
Will Dan turn what evil comes for him against them? That's what Dick says. This is how you're going to do it with the
Right.
box. And will Dan ever teach someone else how to shine like him? Those are all set up in that prologue. That's like the purpose of the. So that's like, I think that's first
Right
an
there.
act itself.
Goals too.
Goals for Dan, just for Dan, though.
Just for Dan. Yeah.
And then the second act is 2011. I'm saying,
Right.
it's 30 minutes.
Right.
2000. I had no idea it was that long, and we set up the before world for Dan searching for help and purpose. He says, "I need help" at the end of it. Abra discovering her power. She says, "I can do that," and we see her use the power for the first time. And then she has that first connection with Dan on the
Right.
chalkboard, and we see
Yeah.
the True Knot expanding their team. We don't see him kill anybody in that second section. We see them expanding the team with that girl, and for the long run, showing, and we get to know the family and the problems and the world building
Yeah.
and the rules of the monster. So we sort of get our before worlds for each of those three sets of characters. And then 43 minutes into the movie, we have 8 years later. 43 minutes.
Yeah.
Insane. And then it's Dan's in recovery. And I think that this is like a third act.
Right.
And it's like a 10-minute act where teenage Abra reaches out on the chalkboard, the True Knot hunts and kills the baseball boy, and then Red Rum hits the chalkboard at 54 minutes. And I think that's when we get that lock-in. And then
Then you get The Shining too.
Then you get yeah.
That's
yeah,
The Shining too.
Then you get the movie.
Yeah. Right.
It's so weird.
It's strange because especially so with my studio hat on or something, can you imagine the movie starting after he's recovered? That's the way probably it would be
Right.
in the future. Maybe there was a
There would have been a
prologue.
line. It would have been a line or something.
Yeah, there would have been a prologue.
He gets
It
his
would-
1 year chip.
He gets his chip. He's in the
Yeah.
meeting.
Yeah, you're right,
He
right.
says something that he's struggling
Yeah.
or something.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you go from there. That would
Yeah.
have been the typical movie.
Yeah.
And instead of having this long history,
right.
kind of that happens.
You said
And the-
biopic is a great
well,
way
in some
to
ways,
But
conceptualize
catching
as
up
you
with a
said too,
person
Jamie, like
over time.
this merits it only because this is a character that we actually have history with.
I mean, I think you're right. I think
Yes.
If it wasn't, we could have started with the chip.
That's
So-
a good
we
call.
could have been like,
so,
yeah,
so what I'm warning, like for new writers, is this
it's not a
method-
lesson.
This method works because I was really interested in Danny Torrance and seeing what Stephen King did with Danny.
Do you think
Torrance.
it's premise delivery then for this?
I think
as
for
a sequel?
this it works. I would worry if this was just a out of the box non-sequel.
Oh, man.
I type this up and you're following this guy in recovery and you're like, what's this movie about? There's this other group.
Right.
I'm not really interested because he doesn't really have huge obstacles. It's like I
No.
want to recover. Boom, he's recovered.
Yeah, and then
I
he
wanted
has
to
to
think-
maintain recovery.
I'm a good guy now. I work.
Yeah.
There's the dead.
We have to
there's the
like
cat. I
be
shine.
interested in this character to even stay awake during those scenes.
Because
You know what I mean? It's just
in some
right.
ways it's 55 minutes of pure exposition is what it is.
I know.
That's what it is.
It's all set up.
It's all set up.
It's 54 minutes of setup.
and it works.
but it's not exactly plot.
not
No.
plot. It's not
Not.
plot. It's really
But
not.
I feel like everything that happens after is only powerful because of those
Yeah.
54 minutes of
Yeah.
setup.
True.
so
Yeah.
it's a unique movie in that way, but I'd caution anybody trying to
I
structure
agree.
it similarly.
Right, right.
I just wanted to talk about it because I think it's really interesting.
I'm a big
No,
Shining.
definitely.
I'm a
Ye-
big Shining fan. The Danny Torrance character interests me. So all that was interesting. to
There
me.
are people who have asked me.
That's
who
also a
haven't
thing where I'm
seen-
worried about. Like, I'm such a fan of The Shining. Like, like I could have watched. This could have been
See,
another
and I'm
hour, and I
not.
might have been fine. You know
And
what I
I'm
mean?
not. And
Yeah.
I think I think it's a masterpiece, but that doesn't mean I enjoy it.
Right.
And for me, I thought it enhanced the first movie. But
You got
there
that
are
Stephen
people,
King thing going.
Yeah, going back to talk why we're talking about this, I feel like that's one of the reasons why the marketing is weird because it's a movie with a 54 minutes of setup. I think that affects the way you can sell this story.
Sure. Yeah.
I think it's all sort of tied together. The failure of its like financial failure, I think, is oddly tied into the way that this is constructed.
Sure. Yeah.
Even though I think it's a fucking awesome movie.
Yeah.
And it's hard to say how the cheeseburger crowd reacts to this movie. We'd
Yeah.
have to be privy to their like exit polls and all that magic because it might
The
not have
audience
the
was
word
dead
of mouth.
silent.
Yeah, it might not have the
Yes,
word of mouth
mine
because
was-
of that.
Yeah.
People might kind of snooze it through the first half
Yeah.
and then kind of like, well, yeah, the end was good.
Well, it's like one of those
You know.
things where I feel like, and this it's not really script related what I'm saying, but I feel like this movie in 5 to 10 years will have its audience.
Dude,
Yeah,
it's
I
gonna
think
pick
so.
up because
It's gonna
it's
pick
so
up.
good.
But
well
like I could see
crafted.
people like walking out and going, "What the hell was all
The
that?"
expectations.
Why was I
removed
watching
from
a bunch of people
expectations.
breathe in steam for like an hour and a half? You know what I mean? Like, I could see somebody saying that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Steam part of it is strangely like The Shining is a movie, for better or worse, that feels like a typical haunted house movie.
It's a
that,
ghost movie.
that we could
Yeah.
all imagine might happen in the real world.
Right.
Where this goes into fantasy territory almost
Absolutely.
immediately with the CGI steam
like you
and
said,
all that stuff.
superhero and vampires.
Yeah,
Look at
It's
Rose's
a different thing.
Rose's projection scene. It looks like
Dude.
it. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
It's very fantasy-esque.
It's very fantasy. But like that's not the movie anybody thought they were getting.
That's right.
And I could see somebody mistaking it for like what is this shit?
Right.
You know, and I could totally
Yeah.
see that. And this is something you come back to later and like, okay, now I get it.
Now that
I get it
I'm
now.
removed from my expectations,
Right,
let me
right,
experience this again and see
And
what
that-
it is.
That's sort of why I think the book was called Dr. Sleep.
Mhm.
And I think
to divorce it from
he
that.
kind of pushed away from it. He's like, yes, this is a further Danny Torrance story, but it's not The Shining too.
Right.
You know?
That's a good point,
Yeah.
Jamie.
Which I'm sure
Yeah.
King told him in this whole, in the lead up to this, right?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Right. They had to have that conversation.
But
Repetition.
so Jamie,
yeah,
you
that's what I
wanna
was looking for. Yeah,
you wanna
repetition.
explain rule of 3 to people, and I'll bounce off of that.
Well, there's a couple different. You can help me out with the rule of 3, but the rule of three is just this magic number where you usually have 3 things happen in a row. Sometimes in lines of dialogue. Sometimes it can be a running gag. So rule of 3
so
usually
important in comedy.
very important in comedy.
Yeah.
So whenever you have like a joke and you just do like you start listing things, it's always weird if it's 2. It's always weird if it's 4, but 3 is the magic number.
3 is the
Because
magic
it's
number.
like the first
Trying to think of
one.
an example.
The first one is random.
Oh yeah.
The second thing
I'll give
establishes
examples from this movie.
Yeah.
establishes a pattern, and then the third one, now that you have the pattern, is the kind of punchline.
like Zombieland. Woody Harrelson says he loves Twinkies, and there's another Twinkie joke, and then he eventually gets the Twinkie.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's three things.
So-
right.
So,
yeah.
so we've talked about this in other podcasts. It's something that I had been using before I learned about it years ago. I had been using it and didn't know it was a technique. It was just sort of that comes like the beginning, middle, ending of, and I don't know about you, but when I'm writing stories, I'm writing scripts, I will sometimes just write the rule of threes and then pop them in. It's like a construction technique where I'll just be like,
Fill in the blanks.
okay, I'm just gonna write this 5-page story, and I'm just gonna write this 5-page story, and then I'm gonna put it in sequence in the movie where it fits. But it's one way to sort of like get the work done ahead of time in the idea phase. But
if you have that, you at least have something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you at least didn't completely ruin
Right.
everything. Yeah.
So the first time I brought it up, I had said I learned like a great official definition of it, and I finally dug it up.
Okay,
I dug
cool.
up where like this great way to conceptualize the technique, and it does. This is from a woman named Julie Marsh. She is a consultant. She has a website called yourbestdraft.com.
Okay.
She had a creative screenwriting seminar called Writing Horror back in the early 2000s
Okay.
that I attended, and I also
In
bought
the aughts.
in the aughts. I
Yeah.
attended and I also bought the DVD. It's out there. You can find it. It's called Creative Screenwriting Expos Writing Horror. Okay, but it's and she said it does.
What's the DVD again? No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
She said it does come from comedy. It's a vaudeville definition, where in vaudeville they used to say if you do something on stage 3 times, then it becomes funny. And so you're right on the comedy thing, but
Right.
she says, and I'm using her words, repetition creates causation and meaning. We understand it's more than just a coincidence. If something happens twice, it could be a coincidence. If it happens 3 times, suddenly the audience understands naturally there's meaning to it. And there's expectation. Tension is created when the audience sees the same thing twice. What's going to happen the 3rd time we see it? And like Jamie said, when you've done something twice, you created a pattern. So we're like, oh my God, what's going to happen the next time? And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I am going to say this movie, not just rule of threes, it does repetition 4, 5, 6, 7 times around one thing. Sometimes it's twice. I think this movie uses repetition more than any movie I've ever seen. I found 17 different, I'm not going to list them. I'm going to make a blog about this that'll be an expansion, because otherwise it'll be me talking for 2 hours about the examples. I found 17 different types of repetition in this movie. 10 of them are just situations that repeat themselves, and 7 of them are dialogue things that repeat themselves. And I'm not just talking about they repeat themselves once or twice. Like the boxes show up 8 times. The hospice cat who visits the patients, that's a rule of 3. The first time the cat visits a hospice patient, Danny helps them die. The second time the cat visits a hospice patient, Danny helps them die again. The 3rd time, he's like, there's nobody in that room, and Dick shows up. So we have a powerful emotional response based on the rule of 3. Rose, the first time she's on a Winnebago, it's bright and zen and she's powerful. The second time we see her on top of the Winnebago, it's dark and she gets her ass kicked and knocked off the Winnebago.
Right.
So the deathbed scenes, the dying patient to Dan says, I'm scared. And he's like, there's nothing to be afraid of. You've lived a good life. The second time we see it, it's the same scenario. He says to Dan, I'm scared. And he dies a peaceful death. The 3rd time, Grandpa is on his deathbed. And he says to Rose, I'm scared. And she's like, there's nothing to be afraid of. And we know he's lived a bad life. And we see him die a horrible, painful fucking death. So it creates power. There's 17 of these in this movie.
Wow. Okay.
And then it's like very unique in that way. Like this, I feel like he just made a whiteboard full of like all
stuff.
the different ways he could repeat and reverse. And I mean, dude, there's like the take your medicine in the when we meet Dan, he's beating somebody up, beating them almost to death. And he's like, take your medicine. And then when Jack offers him the thing, he's like, are you gonna take your medicine?
Right.
It's like there's so many of these. So it's just it's a technique, and this movie uses it more than, like I said, I've ever fucking seen.
Ever.
17 times. And then
Well, I've got my script repetitions you need to read. Right.
it's something I use a lot.
I once saw a technique, and this is less rule of 3 and more rule of 2. That basically said when you're outlining a script, like you could do the exact same thing in a different way in the second half. So first you do it one way,
Yep.
and then in the second half you do it another way. I remember the example. I think it's in that book, My Screenplay Can Beat Up Your
Screenplay.
And he uses Star Wars as an example. So it was kind of like
Perfect.
big ship chasing small ship, and then
It's the
people escape from the ship and something. And then in the second half, he was like, it echoes all those things.
yeah, it's
You
the
can kinda look at it.
escalation factor, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost like he does a different version
Mhm.
of
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Yeah, there's something when you're in like the whiteboards phase, creating opposites, like making lists of opposites.
think-
And this is a
I
great
think you could do it
example.
3 times. if
Both
you wanted to.
thematic, visual, even.
Yeah,
Yeah, you
yeah.
can do a lot.
I mean, that deathbed one, I didn't notice it the first time. And the second time, like, where there's like 2 deliberate long scenes with peaceful, beautiful deaths. And I'm scared, Dan. There's nothing to be scared of. And then Grandpa, I'm scared. You know, that was like a really powerful moment in the
Yeah,
movie.
yeah.
And I didn't realize that it was a repetition.
I mean, I would even say, if I had to pull one out of my butt for this movie, the one that stood out to me the most was Jacob Tremblay's death scene.
Yes.
The kid's death
yeah.
scene.
Oh, yeah.
Versus Rose the Hat's death scene.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
And
th-
there's
those
like,
two
there's
seem
there, yeah, exactly. And
straight
even
up.
Dan has the same repetition where all the
Right.
ghosts get,
Mhm.
yeah. I mean,
Right.
yeah, exactly. Like you said, straight up.
Straight up.
So it creates like more emotional resonance when we
Yeah.
start seeing it the third and the fourth because we know what it's gonna feel like, and yeah.
Also, like interestingly, like kind of had like the True Knots are the gang, and it kind of made the hotel ghosts that
I loved
we
it.
know and love. We like it kind of reframed them as this like gang of ghosts that live in this hotel.
Yeah,
and they're doing the same sort of thing.
they feed off her steam.
They feed
which,
off her steam,
which I
right.
didn't notice in the first time around. I thought they just like killed her.
No, they feed off
They
of
feed
it.
off of her steam the same way that
Right.
Rose has been. It's great.
Right.
I love it.
Well, it reframed the original ghosts. That's what I just thought was interesting.
Mhm.
you
I
know?
never really thought of them as a gang until you said that right
Well,
now.
I mean, like the one thing that I thought was interesting about that is that the way that he actually had them as a gang over top
like
of her.
they're a team.
Who we've never
They
that's
kind of
something
swarm like zombies.
that was
in
like
some ways.
I guess that was a premise delivery thing, sort of, because we've never seen like all those ghosts together as
Mhm.
like here's all your favorites.
They're showing them in a new way.
yeah, and they're all actually separate entities that work together as one. Okay, all right, we kind of didn't have
That's good, dude.
that was an answer to a question.
Yeah.
Like, was it the hotel? Is it just an evil fucking hotel, or was it?
Yeah.
Were these people at one point?
Yeah, I was interested.
know?
That my favorite thing about that was, I think that it's ambiguous in The Shining whether the twins are bad. They're sort of just
'Cause they were just murdered.
show up sort of as a warning to Danny, and
They're cursed.
this feels like they're a part of the team. Like I was like, oh, they're bad shit. Like
Well, I think it was kind of positing that if you die there, you become part of the team.
You become
You're cursed to
right.
be part of the team. So
and I think this movie does do a good job of showing that like people die if they're murdered, they die with as much pain as like the people who live bad lives, sort of become like
Right.
vengeful. Like I could see that
Yeah.
I could see a baseball boy becoming like a vengeful ghost in this story world. You know what I mean? As opposed to the old guys on the bed who are like, I've lived an okay life.
right.
You know? Yeah.
No, that's a good point, man. The repetitions thing. I didn't
It's
pick up on
massive.
that. I didn't-
17. It's insane. I'm sure I missed some
I mean, if
too.
you could feel it,
yeah.
it all feels like a mirror. But
Yeah.
You also had something about POV. To
Yeah,
me.
Yeah,
POV,
so
yeah.
so the first time I watched it, I was trying to figure out where the surprises come from, and I'll use Sixth Sense as an example of what I mean. This movie does a great job of using point of view to manipulate us, and the Sixth Sense when we meet what's his name? Is it Cole?
I can't remember.
In the
When we
Sixth
meet
Sense?
in the Sixth Sense when we meet Bruce Willis, he's alive.
Mhm.
And we are experiencing the story through his perspective. And it's the perspective of a man who is not a ghost. And then he gets shot, and it cuts to years later, and we are seeing the story still from his perspective, and it has created this expectation in us that we're watching the perspective of a man who's alive. And the only reason the twist works is because our point of view has been manipulated. He's sort of like an unreliable narrator. Like he doesn't know.
We're seeing it the way he
then,
sees it.
And then they tell us, all this perspective you've been seeing is not from the perspective you thought it was, and suddenly we're like aware, and the surprise works because of the manipulation of point of view. So this movie like does some really awesome weird shit with point of view. It does dream within a dream twist. It does superior position. Dick. It's like so.
Right.
I'll give you the examples, and I think the first time I saw this, I was like, what the fuck is the significance of that town shot? You remember the shot when he arrives into Teeny Town, and it's like this weird forced perspective where the town is exactly the same size on screen, and then it pulls back and it's this tiny town.
It's this tiny town,
and I think that was saying, okay, everything you think about the perspective of what you're watching is going to be twisted and unexpected. And I didn't understand I was like, there's got to be something fucking significant about this.
It'd be funny
like,
if it wasn't that.
Mike Flanagan's going
like,
to,
he's
gonna
cool.
listen to this. Yeah,
It
just
looked
like,
cool. He's not listening to this. Don't worry about
no,
that.
I know. But, it just looked cool. So, okay.
Or you can just go, that's what I meant.
I'll explain my theories here and how I think the movie uses techniques. Dan, when we see his point of view, when he sees ghosts, we see ghosts, and that's what we know.
Right.
We understand that's when when we're seeing things through Dan's eyes, he's seeing ghosts.
Right.
We understand what that feels like. Abra, we see her perspective when she's looking in, and we understand what it looks like when she's using her powers. It's very specific. Right. And the same thing with Rose. So we have now expectations for what each three of these people's perspective look like. And then comes the supermarket where the surprises start. Abra looks in and we're like, okay, she's looking into Rose. But bam, Rose turns it on her head and starts looking into Abra. And it's like that's our first big surprise in the movie. Like suddenly Rose is in her head and we thought she was in Rose's head.
Right.
Dream within a dream, right? It's fucking weird. The second one is Abra's bedroom trap. Rose looks into Abra's head, and then she gets there, bam! It's not Abra's head. It's actually Rose's head that Abra has put into a trap, right? And so those are like based on the expectations that they created. And then on the way to dig up the baseball boy, Dan says, how'd you do that? And she's like, it's a trick. I've never done it before. And then she goes inside his head. And so now we're seeing Dan's perspective completely different. So like all of a sudden all bets are off. And we don't know what it looks like for any of these people.
Also, to add to this, I think we talked about this in the It podcast, It Chapter 2 podcast we did, how we talked about undefined, breaks its own rules, undefined character powers and all that.
Yes.
This movie is, it somehow kind of sidesteps that, but to some degree, we have literally no clue what these characters are capable of or why or how at all at any time.
I couldn't believe it worked for me because, I'm big on the marzipan.
Right. No. That's what I'm saying is like it worked and I didn't question the stuff
I do think it hurts the tension a little bit again in Act 3 because you're not sure what to worry about. He seems to have the upper hand. I don't know. It hurts a little bit in Act 3, I thought. But up till then, not as much.
Outside of that, I'm just saying, like, the shine in general, like, it's not defined in the first movie, really, outside of, like, you can see ghosts and you can talk to people with your brain.
Right. And this expands on that
This expands on it so much, it's to a degree where it could have been completely detrimental. But it's escalated to the point where, like, I gave myself.
It's almost like we're learning while they're learning.
Yeah, we're learning while they're learning.
Abra's learning how to do new things, and they call it new tricks. And they're like Dan says, like Dan's in Abra's house, and he's like, I need you to let them track you, and I need you to try a new trick. And so like maybe it works because they set up they're going to try something they've never done before, and so how could they define their powers for us if they've never done it before?
It also goes
they're learning as we learn. It's sort of like they're fish out of water.
That also goes with the monster in the house thing. Like since we're learning with them, we have no clue where the evil could be at any moment.
Right. Yeah, that's good.
You know what I mean? It's completely arbitrary.
Yeah.
Like any moment it could introduce something new. Like, whoa, they can do that?
So that's probably why
for one second,
works.
I thought Rose was actually flying.
You
during-
don't know.
I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah,
I was
you
like,
don't know.
I was like, oh, is she?
Is she
I was like, can
there?
she just fly? Is it?
And I think that's
are
like,
we doing that?
and I think the ambiguity you feel there
Which
is
should be a totally different movie
Right.
completely.
she's flying now.
They can fly.
but I think like what you're saying is like
Yeah.
a great point. Like the ambiguity is a testament to the craft.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They've been
It's also part of the idea, the premise as well,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We like The Shining shouldn't be defined.
right. Oh,
It is.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's a thing that is. It's like a Lovecraftian ideal.
Yeah.
Almost. Yeah.
Just like the Force.
The
Yeah.
Force. It's the
Yeah.
Force, right?
There's all these different
We're
variations
always
of
people-
Force
learning new
users.
powers of the
Force
Force.
users.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Luke can't do that. Oh,
Yeah.
Why?
Why?
It's
Yeah.
fake and it doesn't exist.
Good call.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But more. I just was posing that all the surprises in the movie work because of our perspective and the way that our perspective is manipulated.
Right.
The trapping the true knot in the woods. We think what we're seeing. We don't know what they're gonna do.
Right.
So we very well, there's a part of me that was like thinking it was Abra sitting there on the bench when they lure him in, and she swaps the perspective. It's not Abra, it's a stuffed animal.
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
Crow's point of view shift. He says to Rose, Rose is like, what if she plays a trick on you?
Question why the stuffed animal had to be there, but okay, go ahead.
What do you mean?
Why did there need to be anything on that table?
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
I was thinking the whole thing's kind of cinematic because why start shooting after they find out there's a
Right.
stuffed
Just
animal?
start shooting that.
It's because of movies. I guess.
It's a movie.
Yeah.
Good call.
Right.
I didn't really think about that. Why do you need it there? It could be nothing.
Yeah, right.
But she did use the baseball glove. If I can touch the baseball glove, I can see. Maybe there's some physical.
There's some kind of tangibility
tangible.
thing. Yeah.
But and then the best one is and the big POV shift with Crow's POV
Mhm.
when he's like, I got a trick too.
Mhm.
And then whop, he's behind her and he drugs her.
Yeah.
And then it just keeps going, man. Like Crow has Abra sedated and tied up, but surprise number one, Dan enters Abra's body, something we didn't know he could do, something we've never seen
They can
before.
possess?
Oh,
Okay.
shit.
Right.
And then surprise
Right.
number two, Dan forces Crow to crash, something we didn't know he could physically do that, you know? And once again, that's a surprise based on our point of view. And then the Overlook Maze is the best one, and they get pretty fucking literal with it. She says she enters the Overlook Maze, and she says she thinks it's Abra's head. And she says, you've made some improvements since the last time I was in your mind. And Abra says, how do you know we're not in your mind? And we don't know either. And then twist, Rose says, this isn't your mind, is it? You're just the bait. We're actually in Dan's mind. So it's all fucking perspective and the
Right.
manipulation. And my favorite one is they give us superior position, because a lot of the time we're not given superior position in this movie. They give us superior position. They show
Explain
us.
what superior position is.
Jamie, what's.
Superior position means you know something that the characters you're typically following don't know.
Right. And
So like we saw the killer, but the
But
the
Ethan
protagonist
Hawke
has
did, Dan didn't.
Right.
Right.
And
Okay.
so my favorite example of using perspective to manipulate our emotions is we saw them bury the boy. They could have not showed us them burying the boy, but we saw them bury the boy. So this whole 20-minute buildup of them getting to the boy
Yeah.
has more like tension, because we're like, shit, what's gonna happen when they fucking bury this dig up this corpse?
Right.
Like oh my god, I don't want to see that. Like,
Right.
and what if he's not there? There's all this tension created around giving us the superior position that, like, if they just take away that one moment where they're burying them, we feel none of that, and we're just like, I wonder if he's gonna be there. They're looking for something.
Right.
So I thought this was like a masterclass in using perspective to like manipulate our emotions. And I didn't think of that the first time I saw it, but the second time it was like very noticeable to me.
Yeah, you have a superior position for seeing it twice.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, I saw it once last night.
I'm sorry. That's why. I
No,
was
it's
like-
okay. It's okay.
It's like it's just gonna be me talking. I don't want to talk about.
Well, you had two more last things. One more window characters.
Okay.
Yeah, what are window characters?
Okay.
For help us.
So
me
so
for that.
window character is like Wilson in
Mhm.
Castaway. So
Right.
you need
Not Home Improvement.
you need it's who the characters talk to. It they serve many functions, but basically it's like how it sounds. They give you a window into your character and how they're feeling.
Mhm.
And without them, we don't understand how the characters are feeling about like the situation that's going on. That's how you track the theme and how the character is growing or not growing.
Someone to talk to.
Someone to talk to. And this one I feel like is a great example. Like everybody that Dan talks to shows you a window into Dan and what he's feeling and how he's shifting.
Definitely.
And also Crow, most scripts that I get from clients when they have a villain, they don't have a window character for the villain to allow you to understand how the villain is feeling about the situation that's happening.
Like a Bob from Batman.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
But
89,
Bob,
89.
I mean, you barely learn
anything.
This
Yeah,
one,
yeah.
Crow's function is to allow us to understand how
Rose.
Rose is feeling
Right,
about the
right.
things that are
Mhm.
happening. In every single scene,
point.
he's debating with her, like, I don't think we should do this. You know that like we're running out of steam.
Mhm.
I kept laughing every time they're saying we're running out of steam.
God, yeah. Stop blowing air up my ass. Right? Yeah.
But it's just a great example of how to use characters to like give you Bob
All the
insert,
steam,
insert fart jokes.
I know. I was gonna say there's so many steam puns. Right.
But yeah, I had two more, and then confessional scenes. Do you use confessional scenes, Jamie?
I do. I think I do. I think and window characters are often the source of those, but there's I'm trying to think. In Will Martell, we were talking about him. Bill Martell writes a bunch of books. I remember one of the first books I ever read in screenwriting is it's called Secrets of Action Screenwriting.
Mm-hmm.
Great book, little blue book. But he called them Hamlet moments. And he
Mm.
said
That's good.
you had to give your character Hamlet moments to express like their inner feelings and stuff. And
they need someone to unload on.
it needs somebody to
Yeah.
unload on. Sometimes it can be a message on an answering machine.
Mhm.
So there's all kinds of ways you can do it.
Yeah.
But I think there are definitely a couple times in your movie that typically there are these Hamlet moments or
Yeah.
confessional scenes.
He has two of them, but the big one, he has the one at AA talking about his dad.
AA is a very common
Yeah,
one.
I
you
mean,
see
that's
in
where you...
movies. Therapy is another
Therapy.
one.
I learned this from Jack Epps Jr., who I've brought up a couple times. He consulted for me a couple times when I was learning the craft. He wrote Top Gun and Dick Tracy, and he used to be the head of screenwriting at USC. And he did a seminar that I went to once, and he called it confessional scenes because he used the Toy Story example of when Toy Story is talking to Buzz. He's in a crate. And the lighting,
Toy Story's talking about
when Woody is
Woody.
talking to Buzz,
Woody. Okay, yeah.
he's in the crate, and the lighting on his face looks like he's in a confessional with a priest.
Yeah.
And he's talking about his. It's usually where the character talks about their fatal flaw. They admit their problem, and it's sort of the moment. Like it usually comes either like end of Act 2 or Dark Night of the Soul,
Right.
where the character's I am the source of the problem, and I need to get a handle on it if I'm gonna overcome this main story problem. And like Woody says, what chance does a toy like me have against an action figure?
Right.
I should be the one who's strapped to the rocket right now, not you. You know, like this one.
So would like Al from Die
Hard
Hard?
is my next.
Oh, yeah.
Are you
example.
serious?
Yeah. He says
I have not seen his papers, people.
I had an accident, and so you can have.
That's amazing,
Dude, you shining on me?
Yeah, dude. Let me drink your steam.
Now
and it
for
could-
my trick.
Right.
Jamie,
right.
what's next? Jamie's gonna juggle the
I'm out of
microphones.
steam.
Jamie's out of steam. Listeners are out of steam. And it can be supporting characters. That's the thing. Al has that's one of the most famous ones.
Right.
I shot a kid. I had an accident. And he admits. And then the next time we see the scenario, he's admitting it. It helps him overcome it.
Right.
So this one has.
He's also the character for John McClane to give to.
He's a
pour
window
out-
character
to him.
for John
Right,
McClane.
yeah, right,
Yeah,
right.
imagine Die Hard without that character. That's how
It's a
we're
much lesser
able to
movie,
get
yeah.
into John McClane's. That we're going to do Die Hard soon. So
We'll talk
we'll
about
revisit window characters.
window characters.
But there's the best one in this movie is when he's at the his dad is pouring him a drink. And he tells the story of how, and that's another technique for the confessional. It's usually a person telling a story about their lives. So Al is a great example. He's telling a story about their lives. And Dan tells a story about being guilty that he could see the black flies on his mom and she's dying, and he was ashamed and he couldn't look at her, and she saw that, so he wasn't able to like kind of console her in death the way that he ends up doing to all the old people in hospice.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, it's just another great tool.
There you go.
Window
Yeah.
characters. That's
Yeah.
good. I don't think
Window and
have we
confessionals.
talked about window characters?
I don't think
before
so.
on the show?
One, we brought it up in one episode, but yeah, it's a really good way to use. I mean, honestly, I think great scripts, all the characters that talk to the main character are window characters in some way or another.
Right.
And like, you know, everybody says, well, I want to give my side characters arcs, and you can do that, but ultimately I feel like the purpose of the supporting characters is to help the main character grow, and like that's what this yeah.
So yeah, tell anybody that who's like mad that supporting characters don't have more of a spotlight. Because
Dude, they're so important.
I feel like that's often said. Like if some, you know, like people watch movies now and they're like, well, actually, he's the actor that I'd rather be spotlighted, but that's not how writing works.
Right.
He's a side character.
Exactly.
Yeah, it serves a function in
And
writing.
there's plenty
Right.
of scripts, I'm sure I'm guilty of it, where you fall in love with the side character and then they start ending controlling your story. All of a sudden, for 30 pages, it's this other person
When they shouldn't be.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
That's all I got.
That's the end of Jimmy's massive Dr. Sleep thing.
I'm sorry.
No, I mean, I think you covered everything I would want to talk about. So
yeah, exactly. I think you should publish it and put it on Kindle.
I'll put it in
$2
an ebook.
download.
tag Mike Flanagan in the link, and then
That's right.
move on. He'll hire you. Well, what? I guess the last question. What did we learn?
I learned that a 5-act movie could be like satisfying, and even though it's not making money, I think it's a very commercial movie. Like, I think it's very tangible. Like, yeah. I
If
don't
people went,
know. If people actually went, I think
if they
would
showed
like
up, yeah.
it. Yeah.
Jamie,
Yeah, this really isn't a screenwriting thing, but I love when sequels are bold and do different genres.
Yeah, man.
And just do
Stole my
something
thing.
completely, off the
that's
grid.
exactly what I was gonna say. Yeah, I mean, most of my favorite movies ever are sequels that did something so different. It's like, it's almost like either hated.
Not just hitting the beats or something.
Yeah, it's not remaking the same movie over again. You know.
Yeah.
Like Die Hard 2 is literally the same movie over again.
Right.
But this as a sequel, it's not even in the same ballpark until the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, it almost feels like a different genre.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it works.
I think it works.
It
I
works.
love this movie. This
I
is one of
love
my
it.
favorite movies I've seen this year.
Yeah, it's definitely one of mine.
I loved
and
it.
you liked it at least, right?
No, I really like it.
Okay.
I really enjoyed it.
Okay.
It's a tricky one because I see issues with it.
I feel like
And
rewatches will be rewarding.
I see. I don't think the issues with this one either are with what Flanagan did at all. I think it was with the book, the
book.
story he was
Him
adapting.
having to.
So I think he
okay.
did an amazing adaptation of a book that maybe would have been better as a television show, or maybe is better as a book. So I think he did a great adaptation of a book. That's my take on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of is a source
I-
material.
well
might
said.
have-
Yeah, I think he did a great job adapting this material, from what I can tell, without reading the book, but knowing what the book is.
All right,
Yeah.
thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening, guys.
All right, bye.
Bye.
You have just listened to Writers Blockbusters, a screenwriting podcast featuring two professionals and another guy. Available only on Thundergrunt.